On my first day at my new job in Boston, I merely hoped to survive the boring onboarding. Then I noticed a framed photo on the adjacent desk. The man in it was my husband. That smile, that watch, that jacket were unmistakable. The true blow came when the young woman beside me smiled. "That is my fiancé. Wade says we are getting married late this fall." I had just walked straight into a massive betrayal. My name is Delilah Wright. And at 34 years old, I had built my entire life on the principle of control. I had orchestrated my career with precision, culminating in this very morning. I had just moved to Boston to accept the position of Director of Strategic Communications at Asteron Urban Grid. After pouring years of my life into a soul-draining, high-pressure corporate meat grinder in Chicago, this was supposed to be my clean slate. Asteron was an innovative urban infrastructure firm, sleek and forward-thinking, and stepping off the elevator onto the 42nd floor, I felt a rare spark of genuine optimism. I was ready to leave the exhaustion behind. I was ready to build something new. The HR coordinator led me through a maze of glass partitions and polished concrete floors, finally depositing me at my new workstation. It was a prime spot, bathed in natural light overlooking the harbor. I was seated right next to Brielle Sutton. Brielle was a partnership manager. She was perhaps in her late 20s, radiating that effortless, bright-eyed enthusiasm that usually grated on my nerves before I had finished my first coffee. But Brielle was genuinely warm. She had a kind, open face, perfectly blown-out blonde hair, and a welcoming smile that seemed entirely devoid of corporate calculation. She was the kind of person who baked cupcakes for office birthdays and remembered the names of everyone's pets. She was, by all immediate appearances, entirely harmless. "It is so wonderful to finally meet you, Delilah," Brielle said, leaning over the low, frosted glass divider that separated our desks. "We have been waiting for you to start for weeks. If you need anything, the printer codes, the good coffee machine on the floor below, or just a map of the neighborhood, I am your girl." I smiled back, a genuine, professional curve of the lips. "Thank you, Brielle. I will definitely take you up on that. Right now, I am just trying to figure out how to untangle my laptop charger." As I reached down to retrieve my bag, my gaze drifted across the divider and landed on her desk. It was meticulously organized, adorned with a few thriving succulent plants, a pastel-colored planner, and a single, polished silver picture frame angled slightly toward her keyboard. My eyes locked onto the photograph inside the frame. The air in my lungs turned to jagged ice. Time seemed to slow to a terrifying, viscous crawl. It was a picture of a man and a woman. The woman was Brielle. Her face turned up in a joyous, sunlit laugh, her arms wrapped tightly around the man's waist. They were standing on a weathered wooden pier, the vast blue expanse of the ocean stretching out behind them. The man holding her was my husband. It was Nathan Coulter, my husband of 7 years. He was wearing the same navy blue windbreaker I had bought him for his birthday. On his left wrist was the vintage leather strap watch I had tracked down through an antique dealer in London. I knew the exact slope of his shoulders, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck when the sea breeze caught it, the precise geometry of his jawline as he smiled down at the woman in his arms. But the absolute soul-crushing horror did not lie simply in seeing my husband embracing another woman. The true, sickening blow came from the context of the image itself. I recognized that pier. I recognized that specific, golden hour light. We had been to that exact spot in Newport during our anniversary trip last summer. I remembered the afternoon perfectly. We had stopped on the pier. I had handed my phone to a passing tourist to take a picture of us. I stared closer at the silver frame on Brielle's desk. The right side of the photograph had been meticulously cropped. It was framed so tightly that a tiny, almost imperceptible sliver of my own floral silk dress was still visible right at the very edge of the matte border. Nathan had taken the photo of the two of us, cropped his own wife out of the frame, and seamlessly inserted himself into a narrative with another woman. Or perhaps he had taken Brielle to the exact same spot on a different day. wearing the exact same clothes. Either way, the reality was violently tearing apart the fabric of my world. My heart hammered a frantic, deafening rhythm against my ribs. A cold sweat broke out across my shoulder blades. The instinct to scream, to flip the glass desk, to grab Brielle by her impeccably styled hair and demand answers surged through my veins like electricity. But I am Delilah Wright. I do not shatter in public. I force my lungs to expand. I lock the tremors deep inside my core, burying them beneath layers of practiced corporate composure. I blinked, clearing the sudden sting behind my eyes, and kept my voice perfectly level, injecting just the right amount of casual, polite curiosity into my tone. "That is a lovely picture," I said, gesturing vaguely toward the silver frame. "Who is that?" Brielle's face lit up with an incandescent, unmistakable pride. She reached out and gently touched the top of the frame. "That is my fiancé," she said, her voice dripping with affection. Wade Coulter. Wade, not Nathan. Wade. He was using his middle name. Nathan Wade Coulter. "Oh, congratulations," I managed to say, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "How long have you two been together?" "Almost 3 years." Brielle beamed, entirely oblivious to the fact that she was currently dismantling my sanity piece by piece. "He is amazing. We are actually deep into wedding planning right now. We are aiming to get married late this fall." Almost 3 years. The math hit me with the force of a physical blow. The timeline aligned with terrifying, sickening precision. Nearly 3 years ago was exactly when Nathan had received his promotion at his consulting firm. It was the exact period when his schedule had shifted drastically. The late-night strategy sessions, the sudden influx of out-of-state client meetings, the weekend networking retreats where he was unreachable for hours at a time. I had never questioned it. I had supported his ambition, managing the household, keeping the foundation steady while he supposedly built our financial future. He had not been building our future. He had been funding a parallel existence. I turned back to my laptop, my fingers hovering rigidly over the keyboard. I nodded and offered Brielle another empty, polite smile. "That sounds wonderful." "Brielle, truly." I spent the next 2 hours in a state of hyper-aware dissociation. I clicked through onboarding modules, signed digital non-disclosure agreements, and reviewed the organizational charts of Astron Urban Grid. Outwardly, I was the sharp, focused new director. Inwardly, my mind had shifted from the paralyzing shock of a betrayed wife into the cold, calculating survival mode of a strategist. This was not a mistake. This was not a drunken, one-night lapse in judgment in a lonely hotel bar. A man does not accidentally maintain a fake name, forge a 3-year relationship, and plan a wedding by mistake. This required intense logistical coordination. It required separate finances, burner phones, fabricated alibis, and an alarming capacity for sustained psychological manipulation. If Nathan was capable of living 2 entirely separate lives, the deception had to run far deeper than just romance. He was a man who calculated every risk and always ensured a return on his investment. Late in the morning, my calendar pinged with an invitation for an introductory meeting with my new superior, the Vice President of Operations. I sat across from his massive oak desk as he laid out the immediate priorities for my department. He spoke about market positioning, stakeholder engagement, and the critical importance of a massive new city infrastructure bid Astron was preparing to launch. "This bid is make or break for our third-quarter projections." "Delilah," the vice president explained, adjusting his glasses. "It is highly complex, involving multiple municipal funding streams. We need our messaging to be bulletproof, to ensure the financial modeling is absolutely airtight before we go public. We are bringing in an external consultant next week. He is a top-tier financial advisor. He is going to audit our proposal and help us structure the public-private partnership angles." I nodded, taking notes on my pad. The perfect picture of an attentive executive. "Understood. I will make sure my team is prepared to align the communication strategy with his financial models." "Who is the consultant?" The vice president glanced down at his screen, His name is Wade Coulter. He runs a boutique advisory firm. Very sharp guy. Brielle Sutton from Partnerships actually helped facilitate the introduction. The pen in my hand snapped against the paper, leaving a dark, jagged ink stain on the crisp white page. I did not gasp. I did not flinch. I slowly set the pen down. Wade Coulter. The shockwave rolled through me, cold and absolute. The affair was not just a secret hidden in another zip code. Nathan had not just compartmentalized his betrayals. He was actively weaving them together. He was bringing his fake life, his fake name, and his fake fiancé directly into my sanctuary. He was infiltrating my new company. This was no longer just a crisis of my marriage. This was a direct threat to my career, my reputation, and my financial independence. He was bringing his intricate web of lies right to my doorstep, sitting at the intersection of my personal devastation and my professional domain. I looked up at the vice president, my expression calm, my eyes dead and focused. "I look forward to meeting Mr. Coulter," I said smoothly. I walked out of the office, the illusion of my fresh start completely shattered. Nathan thought he was the smartest man in the room. He thought he could manipulate two women, two identities, and a multi-million-dollar corporate contract without a single collision. He was wrong. He had just walked his grand deception right into my territory. And I was not going to simply file for divorce. I was going to burn his parallel universe to the ground. The team took me out for a welcome lunch at a sunlit bistro exactly 2 blocks from the Asteron building. Everyone ordered seasonal salads and sparkling water. The standard corporate midday fare meant to project health and efficiency. I sat directly across from Brielle, perfectly positioned to observe her every micro-expression and gesture. The conversation inevitably shifted from onboarding logistics and software platforms to our personal lives. Brielle leaned forward, her bright eyes catching the ambient light of the restaurant. "So, Brielle, tell Delilah about the mystery man." One of our senior colleagues teased gently over a plate of arugula. "She never stops glowing when his name comes up." Brielle blushed deeply, waving a hand as if to dismiss the attention, but she was vibrating with the eagerness to share. "Oh, stop it. You guys make him sound like a secret agent. Wade is just very private. He works in finance, managing private equity and complex risk models. He is incredibly calm under pressure. He does not like to show off with flashy cars or loud parties like most guys in his field. He always tells me he just likes to build a solid future, brick by brick, away from the noise." Every single word was a polished, sanitized reflection of the man who slept next to me every night. As Brielle spoke, I took a slow, deliberate sip of my ice water, letting the freezing temperature ground my spiraling thoughts. I had to play the role of the interested new coworker. "He sounds incredibly grounded," I remarked, keeping my voice utterly devoid of the jagged edge tearing at my throat. "Does he have any distinct quirks?" "The quiet ones usually do." "Well," Brielle laughed softly, a sound of pure affection. "Whenever he is deep in thought about a market projection or a big contract, he unconsciously spins his ring. It is a thick silver thumb ring he wears on his right hand, and he just turns it round and round. Oh, and he is an absolute snob about Japanese whiskey. He refuses to drink anything else if we go to a nice lounge downtown." My stomach contracted into a tight, hard knot of nausea. The silver thumb ring. I bought him that exact ring 5 years ago in a small artisan shop in Kyoto. The Yamazaki 18-year-old whiskey. There were currently 2 unopened bottles of that exact brand sitting in the locked mahogany cabinet in our living room, waiting for a special occasion. "He also has this specific catchphrase," Brielle continued, entirely oblivious to the fact that she was enthusiastically narrating my own marriage back to me. "Whenever we make a big life decision, he looks at me so seriously, holds my hands, and says, 'An entire life is built on timing.'" An entire life is built on timing. The air left my lungs. That was the exact verbatim phrase Nathan had used when he convinced me we should move a significant portion of our joint savings into a high-yield trust account last year. I forced a polite, encouraging smile. though the muscles in my cheeks ached violently from the physical effort of holding the mask in place. Speaking of perfect timing, Brielle chirped, extending her left hand across the table to catch the sunlight. The diamond was substantial, a flawless emerald cut set in heavy platinum. We just hit a huge milestone. Wade is putting down a massive deposit on a beautiful condo over in the Seaport district. It has floor-to-ceiling windows, right on the water. We are going to move in and start our new life together right after the wedding. The Seaport district. My mind snapped back to a Tuesday evening exactly 2 months ago. Nathan had sat at our kitchen island, casually scrolling through his tablet while I chopped vegetables for dinner. He had casually mentioned that he wanted to research waterfront real estate as a strategic investment. He told me the property values there were poised for a massive spike, and it would be financially irresponsible for us not to diversify our portfolio into that area. I had trusted his financial acumen implicitly. I had praised his foresight. I had not suspected a single, solitary thing. He was not diversifying our marital portfolio. He was using the illusion of our shared financial planning to buy a luxury love nest for his bride-to-be. The rest of the afternoon passed in a punishing blur of strategy meetings and data spreadsheets. I operated on pure adrenaline. Around 3 o'clock, my phone vibrated quietly on my desk. It was a message from Nathan. How was the first day I will be home late tonight? Meeting with partners. I stared down at the glowing screen. Only yesterday, a message exactly like that would have made me feel cherished. A sweet check-in from a hard-working, loving husband. Now, the words felt entirely radioactive. It was no longer a message. It was a rehearsed line delivered by an actor hitting his mark on a stage. I typed back a simple, "It was great. See you tonight," and placed the phone face down on the wood surface. When I finally arrived back at our townhouse in the evening, the familiar environment felt entirely surreal. The heavy oak front door, the comforting scent of cedar and citrus in the foyer, the soft, warm glow of the hallway lamps all belonged to a life that had officially expired at 9 o'clock that morning. I was standing inside a museum dedicated to a dead marriage. Nathan walked through the front door an hour later. He looked exactly as he always did, handsome, faintly exhausted from the day. His tie loosened, the very picture of a dedicated professional returning to his sanctuary. He dropped his leather briefcase by the door and found me in the kitchen, where I was methodically pouring a glass of red wine. "There is the executive," he said smoothly, stepping up behind me. He wrapped his arms around my waist and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to the side of my neck. "How did Asteron treat you today? Did you conquer the department?" His touch, which usually brought me an immediate sense of comfort and safety, now felt like a physical violation. My skin crawled. I willed my body to remain loose and relaxed, leaning back into his embrace just enough to flawlessly play the part of the devoted wife. "It was overwhelming, but very good," I replied, staring at our reflection in the dark glass of the kitchen window. I looked calm. He looked loving. It was a perfect, horrifying picture. Lots of faces and names to remember. How were the investors today? Nathan released me slowly and walked over to the refrigerator. Standard corporate posturing. They want higher returns with zero risk. I had to walk them through the new allocation strategy for 3 solid hours over incredibly dry catered salmon. I am absolutely exhausted. It was a flawless performance. The casual mention of fatigue, the highly specific, mundane detail about the dry salmon, the seamless transition into domestic normalcy. He grabbed a bottle of cold sparkling water and headed upstairs to take a shower. The moment I heard the heavy spray of water running through the pipes overhead, I moved. I walked silently and swiftly into our master bedroom. His charcoal suit jacket and matching vest were draped neatly over the velvet armchair in the corner. My hands did not shake as I reached into the deep inner pocket of the vest. My fingers brushed against thick cardstock and a thin, crumpled piece of thermal paper. I pulled them out into the dim, moody light of the bedroom. The first item was a stiff valet parking ticket from the Harbor Regent Boston, one of the most exclusive, high-end luxury hotels in the city. The second item was a long, detailed receipt from the hotel's famous rooftop restaurant. The total was nearly $800. The itemized list showed 2 glasses of premium vintage champagne, a Wagyu tomahawk steak meant for 2, and an expensive artisanal dessert. I checked the date and the timestamp printed at the very top of the receipt. It was from exactly 2 nights ago. 2 nights ago. Nathan had called me from what sounded like a busy terminal. He had told me he was stuck at the airport due to a severely delayed flight returning from a regional conference. He had sounded so tired and apologetic. But I remembered something else. During our lunch today, Brielle had excitedly mentioned that Wade had taken her out for an incredibly romantic surprise dinner to celebrate the final approval of their condo mortgage. She had bragged extensively about the breathtaking view of the water from the top of the Harbor Regent. I stood completely frozen in the center of our bedroom. The shower water continued to run loudly in the adjacent bathroom, washing away the non-existent stress of my husband's completely fabricated investor meeting. I did not march into the bathroom. I did not throw the crumpled receipt in his face, scream at the top of my lungs, and demand the absolute truth. Doing so would be a catastrophic tactical error. It would only give him the opportunity to spin a new, more elaborate lie, to gaslight me into doubting my own sanity, and to immediately begin covering his financial tracks. Looking at the damning pieces of paper in my hand, a chilling, absolute clarity washed over me. This was not a temporary lapse in judgment. This was not a weak man who had simply lost his way and found fleeting comfort in the arms of a younger, naive colleague. Nathan had built an intricate, frictionless machine of deception. He possessed a schedule that accounted for every single hour of his day. He utilized physical props, like the valet tickets and the fake business trips, to ground his lies in reality. He possessed rehearsed dialogue tailored specifically for the emotional needs of the woman standing in front of him. He had 2 completely separate identities functioning perfectly simultaneously within the exact same city limits. To confront him right now would be like throwing a single, helpless pebble at a reinforced concrete fortress. I needed to map and understand the entire architecture of his lie before I brought the walls crashing down upon him. I carefully folded the restaurant receipt and the valet ticket, slipping them deep into the hidden zippered pocket of my own leather work tote. I then meticulously smoothed out the fabric of his vest, leaving it draped over the chair exactly as I had found it. When Nathan finally emerged from the bathroom, a white towel wrapped securely around his waist and his dark hair damp, I was sitting casually on the edge of the bed, calmly applying lavender lotion to my hands. "You look deep in thought," he noted, tossing his damp towel into the woven hamper. "Is everything okay with the new job?" I looked up at the man who had systematically stolen my reality and offered him a warm, reassuring smile. "Everything is perfectly fine. Nathan, I am just planning out my strategic schedule for the rest of the week. It is going to be very busy." The next morning, the front door clicked shut at exactly 7:15. I stood by the kitchen island, listening to the heavy hum of Nathan's car engine fading down the street. For the first time in my adult life, my husband going to work felt like a hostile operative leaving the perimeter. I did not collapse onto the hardwood floor. I did not hurl our framed wedding photos against the living room wall in a fit of hysterical rage. Instead, I calmly walked over to the coffee maker, poured a mug of dark roast, and carried it into his home office. The room smelled faintly of his cedar cologne. I sat down in his leather ergonomic chair, woke up our shared desktop computer, and prepared to dismantle the man I married. Emotion is a chaotic liability. Data is an undeniable weapon. For years, I had completely delegated the administrative architecture of our lives to him. He was the one who loved spreadsheets, the one who optimized our utility bills, the one who tracked our joint credit scores. I had willingly handed over the keys to our digital kingdom because I believed we were building the same castle. Now, I needed to see exactly what he had constructed in the dark. I started with the mundane. I logged into our shared rideshare account and exported the trip history for the past 12 months into a blank document. I filtered the spreadsheet to only show rides taken after 7 in the evening. A glaring, undeniable cluster of data points emerged, over and over again. The drop-off and pickup pins landed right in the heart of the Back Bay neighborhood. Brielle had casually mentioned renting a historic brownstone in Back Bay. I cross-referenced the dates of those rides with my own digital calendar. Every single trip matched an evening when Nathan had texted me a variation of the same lie stuck at the office. Client dinner running late, emergency strategy session. The digital footprint was careless, born of a man who firmly believed his wife would never bother to look. Next, I opened the browser history. He was usually meticulous about clearing his cache, but autofill is a traitor to the arrogant. I typed a single letter into the login bar of a popular webmail provider, the letter W. The browser instantly suggested a saved address w.coulter at the domain. My pulse remained eerily steady. I did not know the password. But Nathan was a creature of intense, rigid habit. He used a base algorithm for his passwords involving his childhood street name, a specific year, and a symbol. I tried his standard variation. It failed. I tried a variation using his mother's maiden name. It failed. On the 4th attempt, I swapped out my birth year for the year he supposedly met Brielle. The screen refreshed, granting me full access to the inbox of Wade Coulter. It was a perfectly organized ecosystem of a parallel life. There were confirmations for premium theater tickets, reservations at exclusive oyster bars, and lengthy email chains with high-end real estate brokers discussing the square footage of waterfront properties. But I was not looking for romance. I was looking for leverage. I bypassed the personal folders and went straight into the cloud storage drive linked to that specific email address. Deep inside a folder innocuously labeled Archived Receipts, I found a subfolder titled Venture Setup. Inside was a single, heavy digital document. It was a PDF file labeled Personal Guarantee. I double-clicked the file. The document loaded on the screen, detailing a massive commercial business loan. It was a line of credit for hundreds of thousands of dollars. My eyes scanned the dense legal jargon, looking for the involved parties. Nathan was listed as the primary borrower under his legal name, but the shock came at the very bottom of the 4th page. There was my name, Delilah Wright, listed as the primary financial guarantor. Next to my typed name was an electronic signature. It was an incredibly close approximation of my handwriting. The slant of the D was nearly perfect, but Nathan had missed the microscopic muscle memory of the person he was forging. The loop on my H was always wide and rushed, while this one was tight and calculated. More importantly, the final stroke of the L in my last name always trailed off into a long, fading line. This signature ended in a sharp, abrupt stop. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the oxygen scrape against my lungs. He had forged my signature to collateralize a corporate loan. But a lender does not just accept a digital signature without an underlying asset. I opened a new tab and logged directly into our primary mortgage portal. I bypassed the standard dashboard and dug into the account servicing documents. Sitting in the hidden, secondary notices folder was an automated confirmation message dated 4 months ago. Approval confirmation, home equity line of credit. It was a HELOC drawn directly against the equity of the townhouse I was currently sitting inside. The house I had paid the down payment for before we were even married. The bottom of the digital notice contained a tiny, devastating administrative note. Consent received digitally. The reality of my situation violently shifted. The ground beneath me was no longer just fractured by infidelity. It was entirely hollowed out by financial crime. This was not a cheating husband buying expensive gifts for a younger woman. This was a calculated, predatory invasion of my marital assets. He was using the financial stability I had built to fund the infrastructure of his new life, leaving me holding the legal liability if his venture collapsed. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had not called in nearly a year. Nora Bellamy and I had shared a tiny, terrible apartment during our undergraduate years. Now, she was one of the most ruthless and respected attorneys in Chicago, specializing in high net worth property disputes and white collar fraud. She answered on the second ring. Delilah, it is Tuesday morning. Unless someone died, or you are getting a divorce, you are violating our scheduled weekend call rule. I think my husband is using another name and my signature to build another life, I said. My voice was completely flat, stripped of any inflection. There was a pause on the line. It was not a pause of shock, but the distinct silence of a predator assessing a sudden drop of blood in the water. Nora did not gasp. She did not ask me how I was feeling or offer empty, soothing platitudes. Are you somewhere safe? Nora asked, her tone shifting into a sharp, rapid-fire clip. Are you alone? I am in his home office. He left for work an hour ago. Listen to me very carefully, Nora instructed. Do not cry. Do not call him. Do not pack a bag. And whatever you do not leave a single trace that you were inside his digital ecosystem today. Do you have an external hard drive? One he does not know about. I have a blank encrypted drive in my work bag from Astron. Good. Plug it in right now, Nora commanded. You are going to back up everything. I want the rideshare receipts. I want the real estate emails. I want the loan documents. But do not just save the PDFs. You need to take full screen captures showing the time and date on your computer taskbar. When you download the guarantee document, make sure you pull the raw metadata. I need to see the exact IP address and the timestamp of when that fake signature was applied. He opened a line of credit against our house. Nora, he used my equity. I heard you the first time. Delilah, she replied coldly. Which is exactly why you are going to act like a ghost. He is operating under the assumption that you are a blind. Trusting wife. That is your biggest tactical advantage. If he even suspects that you know about the forged guarantee, he will start moving the money offshore or tying it up in shell companies before I can even draft a subpoena. We have to freeze him out before he knows the temperature has dropped. I plugged the small black drive into the side of the monitor. I am downloading the files now. Get the files. Log out of his email. Clear the browser history exactly back to the state it was in at 7 this morning. And then go to work, Nora said. You are going to smile at him tonight. You are going to ask him about his day. You are going to be the most boring, predictable wife on the planet until I tell you otherwise. I am boarding a flight to Boston on Thursday. We will build the cage first. Delilah. Then we will put him inside it. I hung up the phone. The office was quiet again. The files transferred to my drive with a soft, rhythmic, blinking light. I watched the progress bar inch across the screen, knowing that every megabyte of data I copied was another nail in the coffin of Wade Coulter. I settled into my desk chair, the low hum of the Astron ventilation system providing a steady drone against the racing of my thoughts. I opened the vendor management portal on my dual monitors. My new security clearance as a director granted me unfettered access to the partnership division's current project files. I bypassed the public relations archives and went straight into the active procurement directory. I needed to see exactly what Brielle and her team were evaluating. I filtered the massive list of potential contractors, sorting them by their proximity to final executive approval. One specific name emerged at the top of the queue, flagged for a final due diligence review next week. North Ledger Labs. I opened the executive summary. According to the brilliantly formatted document, North Ledger Labs was an agile, highly specialized financial analytics startup. They claimed to provide proprietary predictive modeling for smart urban infrastructure projects. It was a fiercely niche sector, and it happened to align flawlessly with the massive municipal bidding war Astron was currently gearing up to enter. To the vice president and the rest of the executive board, this vendor must have looked like a gift from above. A bespoke solution arriving right at the critical hour. Nobody in this building had any reason to suspect they were looking at a mirage. I clicked the download icon for their primary investor and partnership pitch deck. The presentation was slick, utilizing minimalist corporate graphics and aggressive, hockey stick growth projections. I slowly scrolled past the fabricated financial models and the team bios that conveniently omitted last names. stopping dead on slide 7. The header read, Brand Positioning and Strategic Vision. I began to read the bulleted text aloud in my mind. The air in my lungs turned stale and heavy. Leveraging dynamic predictive data to transform static urban environments into responsive financial ecosystems. Bridging the critical gap between municipal risk assessment and private equity confidence. The phrasing was not merely familiar. It was intimately, undeniably mine. Exactly 7 months ago. Nathan had sat across from me at our mahogany dining table, aggressively rubbing his temples over a glass of red wine. He had claimed he was completely stuck on a consulting project, struggling to articulate a core value proposition for a hypothetical client operating in the urban infrastructure sector. He had begged for my professional insight, praising my ability to take dense corporate jargon and distill it into sharp, compelling market narratives. I had spent over 2 hours that Sunday evening sitting on the couch with my personal laptop, drafting those exact strategic messaging notes to help my struggling husband. He had stolen my intellectual property, repackaged it into a glossy presentation, and was now actively using it to sell a fraudulent company to my own employer. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of his strategy left me temporarily paralyzed. I closed the presentation and opened a new, highly secure browser window. I navigated directly to the official Massachusetts Secretary of State Corporate Registry database. I typed North Ledger Labs into the search bar and executed the query. The database returned a list of public filing documents within seconds. I opened the original articles of organization. The primary registered agent and founding director was listed in stark, undeniable black text, Nathan W. Coulter. Yet, when I cross-referenced this state document with the internal communication log stored securely in the Asteron vendor portal, a glaring discrepancy emerged. Every single email sent to Brielle, every calendar invite, and every official memorandum directed at the Asteron procurement team was signed boldly by Wade Coulter. He was running a blatant shell game out in the open, banking entirely on the assumption that the separate departments within Asteron would never compare notes, and relying on his fiancé to smoothly facilitate the internal introductions. I needed to dig much deeper. I scoured the corporate filings and the supplementary background check documents, hunting relentlessly for the capitalization table. I had to know exactly who owned the equity in this phantom enterprise. I finally located the annual report detailing the ownership distribution. Nathan held a controlling 65% of the voting shares. Directly beneath his name was the second major stakeholder. Brielle Sutton held 20% of the company. The remaining 15% was quietly allocated to an obscure, ambiguously named holding trust. A quick secondary search revealed that this trust showed absolutely no operational history, no physical address other than a registered agent box, and no public-facing members. It was a classic blind vehicle meant to hide assets. My eyes remained firmly fixed on Brielle's name on the screen. She was not merely a naive, love-struck woman picking out floral arrangements for a waterfront wedding. She was an equity partner in a corporation positioned to secure a highly lucrative, multi-million-dollar master contract with Asteron. She was financially tethered to his grand illusion, legally bound to the success of North Ledger Labs. I pulled up the external credit history profile that the startup had submitted to Asteron to prove their financial stability. Startups of this size usually lacked the historical revenue required to win major corporate contracts, which meant they desperately needed substantial collateral to guarantee their performance to a giant like Asteron. I scrolled rapidly down to the underwriting section of the financial disclosure. There it was, officially documented in the Asteron vendor file. The startup was heavily backed by a massive commercial line of credit, the exact same business loan I had discovered hidden in his email archive that morning. The loan secured entirely by a personal guarantee bearing my forged digital signature, heavily collateralizing the equity in my home. The massive scale of his ambition finally crystallized in my mind with terrifying clarity. He was not merely a weak man having an affair. A man simply looking for a new bed does not go through the trouble of incorporating a business, forging extensive loan documents, and embedding his mistress into the ownership structure. Nathan was executing a meticulously planned, highly complex corporate heist, and I was the unwitting, silent financier. He was utilizing my credit score, my home equity, my strategic writing, and now, my new corporate home to launch himself into a completely different sphere of wealth. He planned to use the upcoming Asteron contract as his ultimate proof of concept. Once North Ledger Labs secured this master vendor agreement, the company would gain immediate, unshakable legitimacy in the market. The fake startup would instantly transform into a real revenue-generating entity. He could wash the money he had methodically siphoned from our joint marital accounts through the legitimate corporate channels, fully fund his parallel life, and walk away clean. He would leave me completely tethered to the explosive legal and financial fallout when the inevitable audits occurred. A cold, profound fury settled deep into my bones. It was no longer the hot, chaotic anger of a betrayed spouse discovering lipstick on a collar. It was the precise, calculating, and ruthless wrath of an executive who had just uncovered a massive act of corporate espionage. I sat perfectly still in my ergonomic chair, staring out at the panoramic view of the Boston Harbor through the floor-to-ceiling glass. I realized in that exact moment that simply serving him with divorce papers would be a catastrophic tactical failure. A standard divorce proceeding would eventually divide the marital assets, but it would allow him to maintain the professional momentum he had built entirely on my back. He would still secure the Astron contract. He would still build his empire. He would still win. I could not just fight for the dissolution of our marriage. I had to utterly annihilate his professional trajectory. I had to ensure that at the very moment he reached out to grasp his ultimate victory, the entire foundation crumbled into dust beneath his hands. The battleground was no longer my home in Boston. It was right here, in the boardrooms and data servers of Asteron Urban Grid, and I controlled the strategic communications. As the days bled into one another, a strange and excruciating routine settled over my corner of the Asteron office. Brielle Sutton, entirely unaware that she was sharing a desk with the architect of her impending heartbreak, grew increasingly attached to me. Perhaps she sensed a quiet authority in my demeanor, or perhaps she simply craved a female mentor in a department dominated by aggressive male executives. Whatever the reason, she began treating me as her closest workplace confidant. She asked for my opinion on everything. She wanted to know if a heavy silk veil was too formal for an autumn wedding dress. She asked how to structure her vows so they sounded sincere but not overly dramatic. During one particularly quiet Tuesday afternoon, she leaned over the frosted glass divider, twisting a stray lock of blonde hair around her finger. "Delilah, can I ask you a personal question about marriage?" she whispered, glancing around to ensure the nearby cubicles were empty. "Did you ever debate changing your last name? Wade is quite traditional in some ways, and I know he would love it if I became a Coulter. But I have built my entire professional network as Brielle Sutton. I am just torn." I kept my eyes fixed on my monitor, my fingers resting lightly on the keyboard. The name Coulter felt like a physical weight in my mouth. "It is a deeply personal choice," I replied, my voice smooth and carefully modulated. "Sometimes men attach a sense of ownership to a shared surname. Has he ever mentioned how he handled that in the past? Did previous partners care about tradition as much as he does?" Brielle offered a small, slightly sympathetic smile. "He does not really talk about his past. He had a very brief, tragic first marriage in his mid-20s. He told me it ended a long time ago, and it was a profoundly dark chapter for him. He said they were just two kids who made a terrible mistake, and he prefers to keep that part of his life entirely closed out of respect for his own privacy. So, I never push him on it. I just want to focus on our future." My hands turned to ice. A brief, tragic first marriage, a dark chapter that ended a long time ago. Nathan had not merely hidden my existence. He had actively rewritten our history to turn me into a distant, nameless ghost. We had been married for 7 years. We owned a home together. We shared bank accounts, holidays, and a life. To hear my entire reality reduced to a sympathetic talking point, a convenient excuse used to shut down any questions about his past, was a violation so deep it defied description. He was using a fictionalized version of my pain to build trust with another woman. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and forced a gentle nod. That is very understanding of you. Brielle, building a future requires a clean slate. The next morning, Brielle arrived at the office practically vibrating with excitement. She carried an oversized tablet and immediately pulled a chair up next to my desk before I had even opened my email. The contractor for the Seaport condo just sent over the final rendering approvals, she beamed, tapping the screen to wake it up. Wade told me I have complete creative control over the interior. I put together a massive mood board. You have such an elegant, put-together style. Delilah, I would love your honest opinion before I authorize the material orders. She handed me the tablet. I looked down at the screen, and the breath left my lungs in a sharp, painful rush. I was looking at my own living room. It was not a literal photograph, but the aesthetic DNA was an exact, undeniable match. The digital mood board was filled with swatches of wide-plank European white oak flooring. There were images of custom millwork painted in a specific, warm beige tone. The hardware fixtures were all unlacquered, brushed brass. The inspiration photos for the walls featured a highly specific, textured Roman clay plaster. This was not a generic luxury catalog. This was the exact, painstaking design language I had spent 3 entire years curating for our townhouse in Boston. I had sourced that specific brass hardware from a tiny foundry in upstate New York. I had mixed paint samples for weeks to find that exact shade of warm beige. Nathan had no original taste. He had no unique soul. He was simply lifting the environment I had built for him and transplanting it onto a new waterfront property for his new bride. He was plagiarizing my aesthetic to construct a nest with Brielle. It was a haunting, parasitic kind of betrayal. It is stunning, I managed to say, handing the tablet back to her with a steady hand. The unlacquered brass is a very sophisticated choice. Wade is lucky you have such a refined eye. Thank you, she sighed happily. He loves it. He told me he always dreamed of living in a space that felt exactly like this. The true depth of the tragedy, however, revealed itself later that same week. We were standing in the break room, waiting for the espresso machine to finish its loud grinding cycle. Brielle looked a bit more tired than usual, dark circles barely concealed beneath her makeup. Are you sleeping well? I asked casually, handing her a ceramic mug. Wedding planning can be exhausting. Brielle let out a long, heavy breath. It is not just the wedding, it is the new business. Wade is under so much pressure to get the startup capitalized before the Astron review. Actually, I did something huge yesterday. I am a little nervous, but I know it is the right move. I leaned against the counter, my posture relaxed, but my mind instantly snapping to high alert. What did you do? Wade hit a temporary cash flow issue, she explained, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. He needed to cover a short-term funding gap to secure the primary servers before the big institutional capital is dispersed next month. So, I authorized an advance of $80,000 from my maternal trust fund. I wired it directly to his operating account. The sterile white lights of the break room seemed to buzz louder. $80,000. That is a massive commitment, Brielle, I said gently, watching her face. Are you comfortable mixing family money with a pre-revenue venture? She waved her hand confidently, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of anxiety. Oh, it is completely fine. Wade was so apologetic about even asking, but he reminded me that once we are married, our finances will be entirely merged anyway. What is mine is his, and what is his is mine. It is just an early investment in our shared future. I stared at the young, hopeful woman standing in front of me, and a profound, tectonic shift occurred within my chest. She was not a monster. She was not a scheming homewrecker who had knowingly seduced a married man to steal his wealth. She was a mark. She was a victim of the exact same predatory charm that had convinced me to co-sign loans and build a life with an illusion. Nathan was systematically bleeding her dry, draining her familial wealth using the powerful leverage of a romantic fairy tale instead of a legal marriage certificate. The final confirmation of this shared victimhood arrived that Friday. It was Brielle's birthday. She spent the morning fielding calls from friends, but right before lunch, she gasped softly at her computer screen. She turned to me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You have to read this," she said, turning her monitor slightly so I could see her personal email inbox. "Wade just sent this. I have never met a man who knows how to put feelings into words like he does. It makes every stressful moment with the business totally worth it." I leaned over and read the short paragraph glowing on the screen. "You are the quiet at the center of my storm. Before you, I was just building structures, but with you, I am finally building a home. I love you more with every passing day." I did not need to read the rest. I knew the cadence of those words by heart. During our 3rd year of marriage, Nathan had written that exact paragraph, word for word, on heavy cardstock and slipped it into my suitcase before I left for a challenging business trip. He had simply copied the text from his memory, or perhaps an old file, and pasted it into an email for a new woman. I looked away from the screen and looked directly at Brielle. She was glowing, completely enveloped in a manufactured love story. My anger toward her evaporated entirely, replaced by a cold, heavy sorrow. The rage I felt was no longer a messy, jealous triangle. It was a straight, sharpened line aimed directly at the man who was currently sitting in an office across the city, manipulating 2 women with the exact same playbook. I still wanted Nathan to pay. I intended to dismantle his life with absolute precision. But as I watched Brielle wipe a happy tear from her cheek, I realized my strategy had to evolve. I could not simply drop a bomb in the middle of the room and watch us all burn. I refused to let my vengeance turn this innocent woman into collateral damage. Publicly crushed and humiliated, I stopped seeing Brielle as the woman who stole my husband. I started seeing her as the star witness in my upcoming prosecution. We were both trapped in the exact same scam. The only difference was that I had found the exit door, and it was my responsibility to pull her out with me before I burned the entire building to the ground. Nora Bellamy arrived in Boston on a late Thursday evening, bypassing the standard pleasantries of a reunion entirely. She did not come alone. Walking into the sterile, heavily air-conditioned conference room of my hotel block was Malcolm Rains. Malcolm was a veteran forensic accountant who had spent his entire career dissecting large-scale commercial fraud for federal prosecutors and private equity firms. He possessed the tired, meticulous energy of a man who spent his life looking at the ugly, hidden truths buried deep inside corporate spreadsheets. He did not offer me a sympathetic hug or ask how I was holding up. He simply unpacked a thick, battered leather briefcase and began laying out a series of expansive, color-coded financial flowcharts across the polished mahogany table. "Your husband is an incredibly arrogant man," Malcolm began, his voice a low, gravelly monotone that commanded immediate attention. And in my line of work, arrogance always leaves a very loud, very traceable paper trail. He tapped a thick stack of printed banking documents. "Let us start with the home equity line of credit. I subpoenaed the voice verification logs and the secondary authentication records from the originating bank. The audio file attached to your final digital consent form is absolutely not you." Malcolm explained the precise mechanics of the theft. Nathan had exploited a loose, digitized security protocol introduced by the bank to expedite lending. He had used a series of high-resolution scans of my driver license and my passport, combined with a female accomplice over the phone who simply confirmed my social security number and my date of birth. The bank, eager to close a highly lucrative line of credit on a prime piece of Boston real estate, rubber-stamped the approval without demanding an in-person notary signature. Once the equity from my home was converted into hundreds of thousands of dollars in liquid cash, Nathan treated it like a personal slush fund to construct his parallel universe. Malcolm had traced the disbursements with surgical, undeniable precision. "The money flowed through 3 primary arteries," Malcolm continued, tracing a red line on the chart with his pen. Tens of thousands of dollars flowed directly into an escrow account to cover the massive deposit for the Seaport waterfront condo. Another substantial chunk was funneled directly into the primary operating accounts of North Ledger Labs to artificially inflate the startup cash reserves for the Asteron background check. He flipped to the next page of the ledger. There were endless agonizing line items detailing the maintenance of his fake life. There were heavy credit card payments for luxury weekend getaways to coastal resorts, expensive jewelry purchases, and most damning of all, regular, systematic wire transfers deposited straight into Brielle Sutton's personal checking account. He was literally paying to build his new romantic life using the foundational bricks of the home I had bought. Then we have the corporate structure of the startup itself. Nora interjected, sliding a new thickly padded folder across the table toward me. You found the silent 15% trust in the capitalization table. Malcolm dug into the registered agent for that specific holding company to see who was actually holding the equity. It turned out the trust was a limited liability company registered under the name of Nathan's estranged cousin in Ohio. The cousin had a documented history of minor financial trouble and was completely removed from the Boston corporate and social scene. It is a classic insulation tactic, Malcolm noted dryly, adjusting his glasses. If North Ledger Labs ever faced a severe corporate audit, a tax inquiry, or a federal investigation regarding their initial, fraudulent funding, Nathan had a designated fall guy perfectly positioned to take the legal hit. He built a legal firewall out of his own family member to protect himself. I sat perfectly still, absorbing the sheer, breathtaking scale of the deception. The numbness that had carried me through the early days of the week finally hardened into a cold, unbreakable resolve. I opened my laptop right there in the dimly lit conference room and began systematically severing his access to my financial existence. I logged into the Asteron payroll portal and quietly rerouted my entire director salary into a brand new, highly secure account held at a completely different banking institution. I contacted the 3 major credit bureaus and placed a hard consumer fraud alert on my personal profile, ensuring that not a single new line of credit could be opened without my direct, physical voice verification and presence. Finally, I navigated through the labyrinth of our joint family accounts, ruthlessly revoking his secondary administrative access to the investment portfolios and savings trusts that I had primarily funded over the last 7 years. While I quietly locked the digital doors of our life, Nora prepared the heavy legal artillery. I have drafted an emergency ex parte motion, she explained, organizing a stack of dense legal filings bound in blue folders. This is a petition for the immediate preservation of marital assets, specifically citing dissipation and fraudulent conveyance. The exact second we drop the hammer, I am filing this directly with the Domestic Relations Court. It will instantly freeze the townhouse, lock the remaining joint accounts, and legally prevent him from selling, mortgaging, or hiding a single dime of our shared wealth. He will be financially paralyzed before he even realizes he is bleeding. Sitting in that room, surrounded by the undeniable ledgers of my own stolen life, I realized I had crossed a permanent threshold. I was no longer acting like a heartbroken wife desperately trying to understand a dying marriage. I was operating as a lead investigator, methodically preparing a devastating dossier to completely dismantle a massive fraudulent enterprise. The crippling grief had burned away, leaving only the sharp, calculating instinct to protect what was legally mine and to ensure the architect of this destruction faced total, inescapable ruin. Malcolm leaned back in his leather chair, folding his hands over his vest. He looked at me with a grim, deeply serious expression. There is a critical ticking clock on this entire operation. Delilah, he warned quietly. Right now, North Ledger Labs is a fragile house of cards built entirely on forged documents, stolen equity, and wire fraud. But if he actually secures that master vendor contract from Asteron Urban Grid, the narrative fundamentally changes. The sudden influx of legitimate corporate capital and the public validation from a major industry player will wash the dirty money clean. Everything will suddenly look like a highly successful, perfectly legal startup. Tracing the initial fraud back to your home equity will become exponentially harder, completely obscured by layers of legitimate corporate revenue and very expensive defense attorneys. The weight of his words settled over me like a heavy shroud. Asteron was the master key to his entire escape plan. He intended to use my new company to launder his fake life into undeniable reality. If he signed that contract, he won the game. "When is the final vendor showcase?" Nora asked, sensing the massive shift in the gravity of the room. I looked up from the spreadsheets, my vision perfectly clear and my heart beating with a steady, dangerous rhythm. "Next Thursday evening," I replied, my voice completely devoid of hesitation. "It is an investor dinner and final presentation at the Harbor Regent Boston." It was the exact same luxury hotel where he had taken Brielle to celebrate the condo approval. The poetic justice of the location was almost too perfect to ignore. I knew exactly what had to be done. The decisive blow could not be delivered in the quiet, private confines of a courtroom or across our kitchen island. It had to be delivered exactly where he planned to legitimize his lies. I had to let him walk right up to the finish line, let him taste the absolute certainty of his victory, and then pull the entire world out from under his feet. I booked a small, glass-enclosed conference room at the far end of the floor that offered complete acoustic isolation. I did not want a public spectacle. I did not want to drag Brielle into the middle of the bullpen and shatter her reality while 50 of our colleagues watched over their monitors. She deserved the dignity of a private execution. I sent her a calendar invite for 10 in the morning. The subject line read simply, "Vendor Ethics Review." When Brielle walked in, she was holding her pastel planner and a cup of herbal tea, looking perfectly relaxed. She sat across from me, crossing her legs and offering a bright, cooperative smile. "So," Brielle began, setting her tea down, "ethics review. Is this standard procedure for the final round? I thought procurement already cleared the basic hurdles for North Ledger Labs." "It is standard for contracts of this magnitude." I lied smoothly, opening a blank notepad on the table. "Astron is very strict about conflict of interest and corporate transparency. I was reviewing the filings, and a few minor discrepancies caught my eye. I wanted to clear them up with you directly before the board sees them." Brielle nodded eagerly. "Of course. Whatever you need." I leaned forward, folding my hands together. The state registry lists the founding director as Nathan W. Coulter, but all of his correspondence with Astron is signed as Wade Coulter. Using 2 name variations on official vendor documents can trigger an automatic flag in our system. Do you know why he does not use his legal first name? A slight frown touched Brielle's forehead, but she recovered quickly. "Oh, that is just a personal preference. He has gone by Wade for years. He told me Nathan was his father's name, and they do not have a great relationship. He only uses it on strict legal documents." "I see," I replied, writing absolutely nothing on my notepad. The background check also requires a thorough review of any previous legal encumbrances, civil suits, bankruptcies, or past marital assets that might claim a stake in the company. You mentioned previously that he had a brief first marriage. Do you know exactly when that divorce was finalized? And in which state? Brielle shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The easy confidence was beginning to fracture. "He said it was finalized over 5 years ago. In Illinois, I think." "Delilah, is this really necessary? It was so long ago, and he has 0 contact with her. If she has any theoretical claim to his assets, it is a liability for Asteron," I explained, my voice remaining perfectly calm and clinical. "Does he have an official decree of dissolution, a piece of paper that proves the financial ties are legally severed?" Brielle looked slightly defensive now, her loyalty to the man she loved kicking in. "Yes, he does. He actually showed it to me right before we got engaged because he knew I was nervous about his past. I have a scanned copy on my phone. He sent it to my personal email for my own peace of mind." "Could you forward that to me?" I asked. "I can quietly upload it to the secure compliance folder, and this whole issue goes away." Brielle pulled out her phone, tapped the screen a few times, and hit send. "Done!" I opened my laptop, found her email, and immediately forwarded the attached digital file directly to Nora in Chicago with the subject line, "Verify immediately." "Thank you," I said, closing the laptop. We just need to wait a few minutes for the compliance software to authenticate the file. We sat in silence. The air in the small room felt incredibly heavy. Brielle took small, nervous sips of her tea. I watched the second hand on the wall clock sweep in slow, agonizing circles. 45 minutes later, my phone vibrated on the table. It was a text from Nora. Absolute garbage. The case number does not exist in the state database. The font on the judicial signature block is entirely wrong for that specific court. The clerk's confirmation stamp is a low-resolution image spliced from a completely different public property tax record. It is a fabricated composite. I locked my phone and placed it face down. The moment had arrived. The point of no return. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a standard manila envelope. I unclasped the metal tie and slowly slid out a glossy photograph. It was the original. Uncropped image from the pier in Newport. I placed it face up on the center of the table, right next to Brielle's pastel planner. Brielle looked down. Her eyes scanned the image, recognizing the pier, recognizing the man, recognizing the navy blue windbreaker and the vintage watch, and then her eyes landed on the woman standing beside him. The woman he had his arm around, the woman whose shoulder and floral silk dress had been meticulously carved out of the frame sitting on her desk. She looked at the photo, and then she looked up at me. All the color instantly drained from her face, leaving her skin a translucent, sickly white. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. She looked back down at the photograph, her mind violently rejecting the visual data it was receiving. "I need you to breathe." "Brielle," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it felt loud enough to shatter the glass walls around us. "And I need you to listen to me very carefully." She shook her head. A slow, jerky movement. "Where did you get this? Why do you have a picture of Wade?" "His name is Nathan Coulter," I stated, the truth finally cutting through the sterile air of the room. "And this photograph was taken 2 years ago on our anniversary. This man is my legal husband." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the terrifying, vacuum-sealed silence of a life being completely destroyed. Brielle stared at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of pure horror and desperate denial. No, that is impossible. We are getting married. He loves me." "You are lying. Why are you doing this?" I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of anger toward her. I simply reached back into the envelope and pulled out the thick stack of financial documents Malcolm Raines had prepared. "The divorce decree you just sent me is a forged composite document," I explained, sliding Nora's text message assessment across the table. "He has never been divorced. Brielle, he lives with me in Boston. I want you to think back over the last 3 years. Think about every time he had to abruptly cancel a weekend trip. Think about the evenings he claimed he was stuck in a high-security boardroom and could not answer a video call. Think about how aggressively he avoided putting his name on any joint leases or utility bills until this exact moment with the new condo." I watched the realization hit her. It was physical. Her chest heaved, and she clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a sudden, agonizing sob. The puzzle pieces of her relationship, the tiny, easily dismissed inconsistencies, were suddenly slamming together to form a monstrous, undeniable picture. "He used my home," I continued, sliding the bank records onto the table. "He forged my digital signature on this personal guarantee to open a home equity line of credit. He stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from my marital assets to fund North Ledger Labs." I flipped to the specific highlighted page showing the outgoing wire transfers. "And he used that stolen money to pay for the Seaport condo deposit. He used it to pay for your luxury dinners at the Harbor Regent. And he used it to cover the operating costs of the startup." I paused, letting my next words carry their full, devastating weight. "A startup in which he convinced you to invest $80,000 of your own mother's trust fund. You are not just his fiancé, Brielle. You are his primary local investor. He is bleeding us both." Brielle looked at the bank statement. She saw the exact date, and the exact amount of her $80,000 wire transfer sitting right next to the incoming funds stolen from my house. The tears that had been welling in her eyes suddenly stopped. The devastating heartbreak that was warping her features froze, and then, slowly, it hardened. The profound humiliation of being used as a romantic prop gave way to the sharp, terrifying realization that she had been targeted for her family wealth. She had been financially conned by a man she led into her bed. She slowly lowered her hand from her mouth. Her breathing steadied. When she looked up at me again, the naive, bubbly partnership manager was entirely gone. In her place was a woman who had just realized she was standing in the middle of a burning building. "He told me," Brielle said, her voice dropping an entire octave, turning cold and brittle. "He told me that his lawyer was handling all the incorporation paperwork. He told me the $80,000 was just a bridge loan for the servers. He promised me." "He is a phenomenal liar," I agreed quietly. "He builds a reality out of paper. He uses contracts, fake decrees, and forged signatures to construct a castle, and he traps people inside it." Brielle stared at the forged divorce decree on the table. She reached out and traced the edge of the paper with a trembling finger. Then, she looked me dead in the eye. "I want my money back," Brielle stated, the words devoid of any sorrow. "And I want him ruined." "Then we do exactly what he did," I replied, leaning forward, sealing the pact between us. "We use paper. We do not scream. We do not throw his clothes out on the lawn. We do not confront him tonight. If he knows we have spoken, he will drain the accounts and disappear before the ink is dry on a subpoena." Brielle nodded slowly, understanding the assignment perfectly. The shock was receding, replaced by a ruthless, absolute clarity. "He thinks he is walking into the vendor showcase next week to secure his future," Brielle said, her tone lethal. "He is," I confirmed, "but it is going to be the future we design for him. Are you with me?" Brielle picked up the photograph of Nathan and me, looked at his smiling, lying face one last time, and slid it back across the table to me. "Tell me exactly what I need to do." Brielle returned to her desk the following morning with a performance worthy of a seasoned intelligence operative. She did not merely maintain her standard, bubbly demeanor. She actively amplified her enthusiasm for the upcoming vendor showcase and investor dinner at the Harbor Regent Boston. She brought him his favorite iced coffee when he visited the partnership floor. She giggled softly during their brief phone calls, complaining playfully about the rising costs of wedding catering to maintain the illusion of domestic normalcy. She played the role of the adoring, naive bride to be so flawlessly that Nathan remained entirely blind to the steel trap closing around his ankles. To document his hubris permanently, Brielle executed a specific play we had designed. She sent him a text message asking exactly how she should present herself at the high-profile showcase. She asked if she should merely act as the Asteron partnership manager facilitating the introduction, or if she should take a more personal stance. He replied an hour later, not via text, but through a formal email from his Wade Coulter account. Brielle forwarded the response directly to my inbox. "I want everyone to know you are my future, both in the company and in life," he had written. It was the final, undeniable piece of written evidence tying his romantic manipulation directly to his corporate fraud. He was planning to flaunt his conflict of interest in front of the entire executive board. While Brielle maintained the emotional front lines, I transformed my locked office into a tactical war room. I coordinated a highly confidential, off-the-books meeting with the Internal Ethics and Compliance Committee of Asteron Urban Grid, operating strictly under the guise of a preemptive risk management assessment for the massive municipal infrastructure bid. I utilized Malcolm Rain's forensic accounting reports and Nora Bellamy legal findings to compile 3 distinct, devastating packets of documentation. The first packet detailed the massive, undisclosed conflict of interest, legally exposing the hidden 20% equity stake held by an active Asteron employee. The second packet mapped the completely illegal cash flow, proving the startup operating capital was directly funded by illicit wire transfers rather than legitimate venture backing. The third, and most lethal. Packet contained the undeniable proof of the forged personal guarantee and the stolen home equity line of credit. I did not show the ethics board the full hand or reveal the specific names just yet. I only provided enough verified, redacted data to ensure the compliance officers would be physically present and highly attentive at the showcase dinner. I also needed a bulletproof reason to hold the floor when the time came to detonate the room. I approached the vice president of operations and successfully argued that, given the immense public profile of the upcoming contract, the Strategic Communications Department needed to actively participate in the final vendor vetting process. I formally requested a dedicated speaking slot during the question and answer portion of the evening. My stated goal was to publicly evaluate North Ledger Labs for any potential reputational risks before we signed the master agreement. The vice president, eager to ensure absolute thoroughness, readily agreed and added my name to the official agenda. The stage was officially set. I had the microphone, I had the target audience, and I had the execution documents ready to distribute. 1,000 miles away in Chicago, Nora was moving with the lethal, silent efficiency of a heat-seeking missile. She had finalized the official divorce petition, but it was now heavily fortified with an aggressive motion citing the gross dissipation of marital assets. Furthermore, she had secured an emergency judicial preservation order ready to be filed the exact second the truth was exposed in Boston. If Nathan attempted to panic and liquidate the Seaport condo deposit, empty the remaining joint accounts, or transfer his fraudulent shares to his cousin holding company, he would be instantly hit with a federal asset freeze. He would be financially paralyzed. Malcolm had taken the operation one massive step further. He had utilized his extensive federal network to reach out to his contacts within the fraud department of the major bank holding the stolen home equity line of credit. Given the sheer magnitude of the forged commercial loan and the undeniable metadata evidence Nora had extracted, the bank agreed to dispatch a regional fraud investigator. This investigator was instructed to wait quietly in the lobby lounge of the Harbor Regent Boston during the dinner. If the final evidence was corroborated upstairs in the boardroom, the bank was prepared to initiate immediate criminal proceedings for wire and bank fraud. As the evening of the showcase finally arrived, I stood alone in the walk-in closet of our townhouse, methodically assessing my reflection. I bypassed the standard, tired narrative of the scorned, heartbroken woman. I did not choose a flashy, revealing revenge dress meant to make him regret losing my affection. I was not there to reclaim my husband. I was there to take down a corporate criminal. I selected a heavily tailored, charcoal gray wool suit with razor-sharp lapels, paired with a crisp white silk blouse and understated silver hardware. I pulled my hair back into a tight, severe knot. I looked exactly like what I was, a high-level executive preparing to dismantle a hostile vendor. I stepped out of the closet just as Nathan walked into the bedroom to finish dressing. He was wearing his custom-tailored navy suit, the expensive fabric draping perfectly over his broad shoulders. He stood in front of the full-length mirror, meticulously adjusting a deep crimson silk tie. I watched him from the doorway, my breathing slow and measured. His posture was perfectly straight, his chin tilted slightly upward. There was not a single trace of guilt, anxiety, or hesitation in his dark eyes. He caught my reflection in the glass and smiled, a smooth, practiced curve of his lips that made my stomach turn to ice. "You look incredibly sharp tonight, Delilah," he said, turning around to face me fully. "Astron is lucky to have you representing them. Big night for the communications team." "It is a very big night," I replied, my voice perfectly level, giving absolutely nothing away. "We are finalizing the primary vendor for the infrastructure bid. It is going to change the entire trajectory of the company." "Well, knock them dead," he said, stepping forward to press a light, affectionate kiss to my forehead. "I have a massive investor dinner myself tonight. If all goes well, North Ledger Labs is going to secure its Series A funding, and we will finally be able to take that month-long vacation to Italy we have been talking about." I looked up into his eyes, and the absolute, chilling reality of his psychology washed over me. He was not sweating. He was not looking over his shoulder. He truly, deeply believed he had won. He believed he was the smartest man in the world, effortlessly conducting a symphony of lies, and that tonight was simply his grand finale. He was going to walk into the Harbor Regent Boston, shake hands with my colleagues, smile at his young fiancé, and secure his stolen empire. And it was exactly that immense, blinding arrogance that would lead him straight into the consequences he had set in motion. He had constructed the very situation that would expose him, and he was cheerfully walking up the steps to stand beneath the spotlight he had arranged for himself. "I hope you get exactly what you deserve tonight, Nathan," I said softly, staring right through him. He smiled again, entirely missing the lethal promise hidden within my words. "I always do. I will see you at home." He grabbed his heavy leather briefcase, walked out the front door, and headed straight toward his own destruction. I waited exactly 10 minutes before following him out into the cold autumn evening, carrying nothing but a black leather portfolio filled with paper. The Harbor Regent Boston Ballroom was a cathedral of corporate excess, designed specifically to make men feel powerful. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured, brilliant light over thick velvet chairs and long, polished mahogany tables. The room hummed with the quiet, expensive murmur of several angel investors, legal counsel from both sides, and the entire Asteron procurement team. I sat in the very back row, entirely swallowed by the dim perimeter lighting, a silent ghost waiting for her exact cue. The heavy oak double doors swung open, pulling the attention of the room. Nathan entered. He looked exactly like a man about to conquer the world and claim his stolen crown. His dark blue suit was immaculate, tailored to project absolute authority. His stride was predatory, smooth, and victorious. He wore a confident, winning smile that reached his eyes. Brielle walked right beside him. She played her part with terrifying perfection, radiating the precise, bright energy of a devoted business partner and an adoring future bride. She did not cast a single glance in my direction. They moved to the front of the room, an unstoppable power couple ready to secure millions of dollars in corporate backing. Nathan took his place behind the lucite podium. The overhead lights dimmed, and the massive projection screen flickered to life behind him. The presentation began. He was, admittedly, an absolute master of the room. He spoke with a smooth, hypnotic cadence about the revolutionary vision of predictive data for smart urban infrastructure. He threw out complex analytical buzzwords with flawless execution. He projected massive, exponential growth margins for the next 5 years. He paced the stage slowly, making direct, meaningful eye contact with the lead investors, exuding a magnetic aura of competence. And then, he delivered his closing thesis. He paused, letting the silence hang heavily in the air, and looked directly at the Astron vice president sitting in the front row. "At the end of the day, technology is merely a tool," Nathan said, his voice ringing with manufactured, profound sincerity. "Trust is the absolute foundation of every market. We are asking you to trust North Ledger Labs to build a secure future." It was a magnificent, sickening punchline. The sheer irony of the statement vibrated in my chest. Polite, enthusiastic applause rippled through the elegant room. The moderator stepped up to the microphone and formally opened the floor for the question and answer segment. This was the moment. The trap was ready to snap shut. I stood up. My chair scraped softly against the thick carpet, but in the sudden quiet of the room, the sound was sharp enough to turn heads. I stepped out of the shadows and walked straight down the center aisle. I moved with slow, deliberate purpose, feeling the collective gaze of 50 powerful executives shift from the stage directly onto me. I stopped exactly 10 feet from the podium. I did not ask for a microphone. My voice was a cold, sharpened blade cutting effortlessly through the velvet air. "My name is Delilah Wright," I stated, staring directly into Nathan's suddenly frozen eyes. "I am the Director of Strategic Communications here at Asteron Urban Grid. I am also the individual whose identity, personal home equity, and forged signature were illegally used to collateralize the financial backing for North Ledger Labs." A collective. Breathless silence slammed down on the room like a physical weight. The vice president shifted violently in his seat. The angel investors instantly stopped taking notes. Nathan gripped the edges of the lucite podium, his knuckles turning stark white. The confident, winning smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. He opened his mouth to speak, to spin a lie, to shut me down, but I cut him off, delivering the final, fatal strike. "Furthermore," I said, my tone dropping to a dead, Arctic calm that echoed off the mahogany walls. "Nathan Coulter, the man standing before you, whom some of you know under the fabricated alias Wade Coulter, is my legal, current husband." The oxygen completely vanished from the ballroom, before a single executive or lawyer could react to the detonation. Brielle stood up from her front row seat. She did not tremble. She did not shed a single dramatic tear. She turned her back on Nathan and faced the Astron board directly. "I am Brielle Sutton, partnership manager," she declared, her voice ringing with lethal, practiced clarity. "I was entirely deceived regarding the marital status of this vendor. I was fraudulently dragged into the equity files and manipulated into authorizing illicit wire transfers based on a fabricated personal relationship. Effective immediately, I am officially withdrawing all internal department support and recommendations for North Ledger Labs." Nathan finally broke. The panic set in. "This is insane," he stammered, stepping away from the podium, his polished mask cracking into jagged, desperate pieces. "This is a private marital dispute. She is hysterical. You cannot do this in a professional setting." I did not argue with his frantic deflections. I simply pulled a sleek black flash drive from my suit pocket, stepped over to the audio-visual technician's table, and plugged it directly into the master laptop. I took control of the presentation. The massive screen behind Nathan flashed bright white. I projected the split-screen evidence for every single investor, lawyer, and corporate officer to see. On the left side of the screen, the forged divorce decree he had used to pacify Brielle. On the right, the genuine metadata and IP address logs showing the digital forgery of my signature on the commercial home equity line of credit. I clicked to the next slide. The bank statements appeared, 30 feet high, highlighting the stolen funds flowing directly from my property into the startup operating account, alongside the massive wire transfer drained from Brielle's family trust. I clicked to the final slide, the exact, overly romantic email he had sent Brielle, promising her a beautiful future, juxtaposed directly with the original, uncropped anniversary photograph of Nathan and me standing happily on the pier in Newport. The visual evidence of his dual life, his financial crimes, and his profound psychological manipulation loomed over him. Undeniable and absolute. "This is a coordinated attack," Nathan shouted, his voice echoing frantically as he pointed a trembling finger at me. "It is a bitter wife trying to ruin my company out of pure spite." But the room was already rapidly moving against him. The investors were slamming their portfolios shut. The opposing legal counsel was already typing furiously on their phones. The head of the Astron Ethics Committee stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with an air of absolute finality. "Mr. Coulter, Astron Urban Grid is immediately suspending this vendor review pending a full federal compliance and fraud audit," the ethics director announced flatly. As Nathan spun around to argue with the board, a man in a gray suit stepped out from the back corner of the room. It was the regional fraud investigator from the bank, and the financial institution demands that all current company files, operating accounts, and pending property escrows remain entirely frozen as of this exact minute. The investigator added, stepping into the light. The walls closed in completely. Nathan looked at the ethics director, looked at the federal investigator, and finally looked at me. He realized he was utterly trapped. The smooth, calculating corporate predator vanished, instantly replaced by a cornered, frantic animal. The realization that his money, his reputation, and his freedom were entirely gone snapped whatever restraint he had left. He lunged toward me, his face twisted in raw, unfiltered rage. "You destroyed my career!" he roared, the sound tearing violently through the elegant room. He never reached me. Two heavy hotel security guards, prearranged by the ethics board, immediately stepped between us. They grabbed him by the shoulders of his immaculate dark blue suit, physically forcing him backward away from the podium. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting calmly at my sides, watching my husband struggle against the guards. I did not flinch. I did not smile. I simply stood in the center of the wreckage and watched his entire empire burn to ash under the chandelier lights. The fallout from the Harbor Regent Boston was instantaneous and absolute. By the time I took a taxi back to our neighborhood, Nathan's entire carefully constructed universe had been systematically dismantled. The venture capital investors who had been nodding enthusiastically during his presentation had formally withdrawn their term sheets before their town cars even left the hotel valet. Asteron Urban Grid officially suspended the vendor agreement, flagging North Ledger Labs as a severe compliance risk. The bank, acting on the physical evidence presented by their fraud investigator, placed a hard freeze on all remaining disbursements from the forged home equity line of credit. Furthermore, the escrow account holding the massive deposit for his waterfront condo was immediately suspended due to the contested origins of the funds. He had nothing left. Brielle did exactly what we had planned. Early the next morning, she walked straight into the Asteron legal department and surrendered complete access to her personal devices. She handed over every single email, every text message, and every wire transfer confirmation proving he had manipulated her into funding his fraudulent enterprise, because she proactively came forward as a cooperating witness and a victim of financial deception. The company executives opted to protect her position rather than firing her as a liability. She was safe. Nathan did not come home immediately. He finally burst through the heavy front door of the townhouse at nearly 2 o'clock in the morning, for the very first time since I had known him. The slick, impenetrable veneer was completely gone. His custom suit jacket was missing, his silk tie was violently yanked loose, and his hair was chaotic. He paced the living room floor like a caged, panicked animal. He did not drop to his knees and beg for my forgiveness. He did not apologize for breaking my heart or destroying our marriage. He was only terrified of the financial execution I had just performed. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "You just burned down everything I built. You filed for divorce and claimed dissipation of marital assets. You are trying to bankrupt me. You just destroyed both of our futures over a stupid, petty grudge." I remained seated on the velvet sofa, sipping a glass of cold water. "You did not build a future, Nathan. You stole mine to finance a lie. And it is not a grudge. It is an asset recovery operation." He sneered at me. A desperate, ugly expression. "You think you are so smart, but you cannot touch the corporate accounts. The company is a separate legal entity. I will just liquidate my shares, sell the intellectual property, and start over somewhere else. You are not getting a single dime of that money." He turned around and stormed toward his home office, likely intending to log into his encrypted banking portals and begin frantically wiring the remaining capital to his cousin's holding company in Ohio. I did not stop him. I just listened to the furious clicking of his keyboard down the hall. 10 minutes later, the clicking stopped. Total silence fell over the house. He walked slowly back into the living room, his face completely drained of blood. "My accounts are locked," he whispered, staring at his hands as if they no longer belonged to him. "Everything is frozen." "That is the funny thing about legal strategy," I replied calmly. "You always file the paperwork before you light the match." I had not waited until the morning after the showcase to strike. Nora had filed the emergency ex parte motion for the absolute preservation of all marital assets 24 hours before I even walked into the hotel ballroom. The judge had signed the federal injunction, immediately freezing his ability to sell the house, withdraw any venture capital, or shift a single asset into his cousin's shell company. He was trapped in a financial straitjacket of his own making. The final devastating blow arrived at 8 o'clock the very next morning. The doorbell rang. Nathan opened it to find Nora Bellamy standing on our front porch. wearing a sharp trench coat and holding a thick stack of manila envelopes. She did not offer a greeting. She simply pressed the heavy legal documents directly into his chest. "You have been officially served," Nora stated, her tone devoid of any human warmth. "You have 20 days to respond to the divorce petition and the accompanying civil fraud claims." Nathan stared at the papers. Finally comprehending that this was not a dramatic argument he could charm his way out of in our bedroom. He was facing a massive legal war. His nightmare was only beginning. Later that same week, Brielle's retained counsel filed a separate, aggressive civil lawsuit against him for fraudulent inducement. She specifically targeted the $80,000 he had drained from her family trust. He was now entirely surrounded, fighting a brutal, unwinnable war on two completely separate fronts: the total collapse of his marriage and the utter ruin of his financial standing. The legal untangling took several agonizing months, but the ultimate resolution was profoundly cold and highly efficient. During our mandatory mediation sessions, Nathan tried to deploy his usual charismatic tactics. He tried to spin complex narratives about his business intentions and his emotional confusion. The presiding judge, however, did not care about his carefully rehearsed stories. The court only cared about the physical data, and the paper trail screamed the absolute truth. The documents explicitly proved that he had utilized calculated deception to misappropriate my money, steal my identity, and attempt to hijack my professional reputation. The final settlement was an unmitigated victory. The judge awarded me exclusive rights and full ownership of our townhouse during the asset division process. I received a substantial, immediate financial reimbursement drawn directly from the frozen funds to cover the illegal home equity draw. Most importantly, my professional record remained utterly spotless. The Asteron Executive Board recognized my crucial role in exposing the corporate fraud, permanently securing my position as the Director of Strategic Communications. Nathan was left with massive legal debts, a permanently shattered reputation in the financial sector, and the looming threat of federal wire fraud charges. But my true sense of closure did not happen inside a sterile courtroom or a lawyer's office. It happened on a quiet Tuesday morning, back on the 42nd floor of the Asteron Urban Grid building. I arrived early, the morning sun just beginning to cast long, golden shadows across the polished concrete floors. I walked over to my desk, the harbor shimmering brightly through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. I set my bag down and instinctively glanced over the frosted glass divider separating my workspace from the partnership division. Brielle was already there. I looked at her desk. The meticulously polished silver picture frame that had violently upended my universe was completely gone. In its place sat a small, thriving green potted plant. Next to the plant was a fresh, pastel-colored notebook, flipped open to the very first blank page. Brielle looked up from her computer screen. Our eyes met. We did not smile brightly. We did not exchange dramatic, tearful words of solidarity or recount the trauma we had jointly survived. We simply offered each other a brief, silent nod. It was a quiet, profound acknowledgement between two women who had walked through the exact same fire and emerged entirely whole. We had survived the illusion, and we had burned the architect to the ground. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and pressed the power button on my laptop. The screen glowed to life, illuminating my face. I opened my daily calendar, filled with genuine meetings, real strategies, and authentic professional goals. I finally understood that my first day at this job had not destroyed my life, as I had originally feared. It had simply torn away a heavy, suffocating curtain of lies. And now, standing completely free behind that fallen curtain, for the very first time in years, my real life was finally ready to begin. Thank you all so much for listening to my story today. Where are you tuning in from to hear this journey? Please leave a comment below so we can connect and share our thoughts together. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the Olivia Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and support me even more by hitting the hype button so that the story in this video can be heard by many more people.